In today's video, I'm going to go through the most interesting on-chain metrics for the week ending August 11th, 2023. Sweet, let's get into it. To start, we'll go over to DeFi Llama and look at total value locked. At the protocol level, the most interesting changes were MakerDAO, which gained 15.87%. People like their product offerings that incorporate yield from US Treasuries. And then Spark Protocol, which is built by MakerDAO, which went up a whopping 676%. And I'm just going to zoom into that a little more to show how dramatic Spark's rise has been. It was at 25 million really just a few weeks ago, and then it's climbed up over $400 million now. And that's because their DSR vault, so elevated yield for DAI, they boosted the yield to 8% to incentivize more people to deposit there, and that quite clearly worked as far as I can tell. Question is, when that incentive is no longer there, will people keep their DAI on Spark? Time will tell. Moving over to the chain level data on DeFi Llama. Of the major chains, Ethereum, Polygon both gained this week, as did Solana. However, if you look at the largest changes, we can see that by far the biggest increase this week was on Base, both in terms of percent and in terms of absolute amount. Base is already up to $89.51 million in TVL. And if you just zoom into this and look at how it's grown over time, it had that initial bump in July 30th. And this just looks like already like a blip on the TVL chart. It went up to 41 million, things rugged, bad things happened, went back down to 8.5 million. And then look, it's way surpassed what it was. Then now you've got over 40 protocols already on Base. Definitely a chain that I'm going to be watching very closely. If you go back over to the top chains by growth, some other things that jump out are Kujira. So Kujira was up 23.8% with 20 million TVL. And you can see that it just hit an all-time high. And this has really had steady growth since the summer of 2022. And one thing I really admire about the Kujira team is Kujira was an app on the original Terra. And then after UST pegged, after that whole network collapsed, they actually were able to pivot and launch their own layer 1 that has several independent protocols on it. And I always thought Kujira had a really, really solid user interface, even back when they were on Terra. Going back to Base Chain for a second, it wasn't only up in terms of TVL, it was also up in terms of a lot of other metrics. So if you look at active addresses and transactions, for example, over here on Artemis, then in terms of transactions, yesterday it actually passed Optimism and Arbitrum with over 700,000 transactions. And that was in large part due to the launch of an app called Friends Tech, which is a SocialFi app that you can connect your Twitter account to and buy shares of different Twitter accounts, most of which are crypto Twitter accounts. But regardless, that brought a lot of people over to Base, and you can see that the active addresses actually hit 127,000, which was higher than Optimism yesterday and was significantly higher than the peak on July 31st. So lots of people are starting to use Base. Again, remains to be determined how long this will last. But one thing that I think is really interesting is that although there's some speculation that maybe they would do a governance token overall, I really haven't seen that much buzz around an airdrop on Base. So unlike ZK Sync era, for example, I don't think most of this activity is being driven by people wanting to get an airdrop. I think a lot of it is people wanting to get into the ecosystem early because they think that these tokens are going to do well. But I really don't think most of this is airdrop driven. And then if we go over to DEX Volume and look at the chains that gained the most DEX volume this week, then Base also gained, pretty much an infinite percentage because it wasn't really even tracked a week ago. So Base is rank 11 over the past 24 hours for DEX volume. And some other notable gainers over the past week were THORChain up 51%, Solana up 7%, ZK Sync era up 20.36%, and Phantom up 56.7%. And then a couple others that were up were Starknet up 6.65% and Mantle up 39.49%. So to look at this at a high level, first thing that jumps out is you have a new cast of Ethereum layer 2s that are really gaining a lot more transaction volume. You have ZK Sync era, you have Base, you have Starknet, you have Mantle, are all processing more transactions. And so what this tells me is a lot of people saw how well Arbitrum ecosystem paid off, how well Optimism paid off. And that doesn't mean I think those two are dead, but people saw how well those paid off. So now they're trying to get into the new cast of Ethereum layer 2s, especially ones like Base and Mantle that are backed by huge players. Something else that was kind of surprising to me was that Phantom jumped by so much. And so I dug into that a little more, and we can see that it was almost all from this one DEX called WAGMI. And I thought, that's weird. I've never heard of this before. It had this huge volume spike. And so I clicked over to their Twitter page, and turns out WAGMI is rebranded version of Popsicle Finance, which you may remember from the last bull cycle. So maybe that's something to watch to investigate this increase in volume on THORChain a little more. Again, it's up 50% over the past week. We can see this nice little rise over here. And this is all on THORSwap because that's the main DEX tracked on DeFi Llama. So I dug in a little more, and then the biggest event that jumps out to me is that streaming swaps are now available in Ledger Live. So that seems to be what's driving this pretty significant jump in THORChain volume. Finally, to go over to bridge volume, then of the chains that are tracked on DeFi Llama for bridges, we can see that Arbitrum, Optimism, Ethereum, and Gnosis had the largest 7-day net flows. So definitely something to watch because TVL can go up and down based on price, but bridge volume tells you a little bit better where people are actually moving their money. If you want more on-chain stats, be sure to check out my weekly newsletter at dynamodefi.substack.com. Here I send out curated on-chain stats and trends every Monday.